Hi, my name is Steph, and I spend all of my free time reading otherworldly books. I found so many new favorites last year out of the 113 books I read, and so I'm so excited to share my top 5 reads of 2023 with you. Let's start with my top read of the year, and that just has to be The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. N.K. Jemisin literally made me feel like a little kid again. Like, this is what it feels like to fall in love with a fantasy book, to be reading underneath the covers with a flashlight so that your parents won't catch you. I was just so completely immersed in this story. The fifth season takes place in a world that has just been very heavily impacted by seismic disasters. There's acid rain and ash-covered skies and all of these other things, and so the world just lives in constant fear of the next fifth season. Everyone is very much on edge all of the time, and there's this subset of people, which is what the fifth season focuses on, and they have these manipulative earth powers, and they're both needed and feared by the larger community. They're needed because their powers can keep these disasters in check, and so the community kind of relies on them to keep them safe, but then they're also feared because of those same powers. They're hated and they're murdered, and they're actually ultimately controlled and exploited at this training center in the center of a large city. We follow 3 POVs. One of them is a woman who has just witnessed her husband murder their young child for displaying these powers, and he kidnapped their older daughter and left, so she's trying to follow and find him and save her other child. And the second is a child with these earth powers whose family found out and basically sold her to be shipped off to the fulcrum. And the third is a woman at the fulcrum who has been assigned to breed with another person with earth powers in order to produce more people with these powers that can be under their control. And let me tell you, all of these narratives are equally amazing. Like, there are no chapters that you will be wanting to skip or hoping that they'll end soon. The world is masterfully built, and all of these characters are fully fleshed out, fully developed. You feel their rage and their desires and their whole range of emotions. There are scenes from this book that I genuinely believe will haunt me for the rest of my life. Also, one of the POVs is actually told from second person, which may make you squirm, but I loved it. I thought it was really well done. But pulling back a bit, there's so much more contained within this plot. There's themes of systemic racism and oppression and subjugation and slavery, and finding love in self in a world where you are othered and made to feel inferior. It's both a story that's new and agonizingly familiar, and Jemisin just had me in her clutches the entire time. She's truly a master mythologist. Book number 2 is The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, and I found this book simply magical. So we're dropped right in when the matriarch, Orquídea, sends out notice to her massive family that she is about to die and they all need to come home immediately. So they come, a bit reluctantly because a lot of them are estranged, to collect their inheritance. But once they're there, you realize that nothing is normal about this family. There's magic clashing and family members clashing, and amidst all of this, in this chaotic reunion, there's an evil that has followed the matriarch throughout her whole life, and it's threatening to come back and pull up the roots and the support system that she's worked so hard to build. This is a story that's all about family and about accepting your family and their secrets and mysteries and knowing that you'll never fully know them, but you can still love them. It's about the struggle of creating a home where you and your descendants will feel safe, and it's about different generations pushing back against their ancestors and breaking cycles and recovering from generational trauma and so much more. It's about the power of trying to protect the ones you love and trying to build a better life for those who come next, and about how those barriers that are put up between parents and children, they never really work, even if they're put up for the children's own protection. This is magical realism, and so the Montoya family curse, it's generational trauma. But their power is in their magic, which is really their love and their traditions and their ferocity. This book jumps wildly across time and hops around all these different branches and members of the family tree, and I really loved getting to know each of them. Each character has a distinct voice and distinct troubles, and each one pushes back against their inheritance in a compelling way. It's enchanting and poignant and comforting, and this story just came to life for me. Book number 3 is The Deep, and this is one of the most visually immersive, there's a joke there, books that I've ever read. We're following Yetu, who is the historian or the memory holder for her people, which are mermaid-esque descendants of pregnant enslaved African women who were thrown overboard. She bears all the burden of their past trauma so that her fellow people can live in bliss. But slowly these memories start to overwhelm her, and then one day she shrugs it all off and flees to the surface. So this is a story of her navigating her roles and her responsibilities and trying to figure out how to move forward for herself and her people. It's a magical reshaping of terror and trauma and violence, and it's got a brilliant musicality. The story was inspired by a song, and there's a lot of music woven into the book, so it's that, but also like these forms of oral storytelling. This is another story that grapples with the weight of the burdens of your ancestors. Can you tell? I like like those stories, and that generational trauma that lives forever in the body, but it's also the pride and hope that comes along caring for your community. There's so much love and compassion in these pages, and that really moved me. And as I mentioned, this book was so visual. The remembrances and the underwater culture, I could see everything happening. It's a really captivating exploration of a community's desire to forget, but also to hold on to the lessons from that rage and anguish. A community's hope to preserve all of their stories in order to someday introduce them to their descendants who will hopefully be in a safer place. And there's so much more that's so eloquently written into such a short piece. Rebuilding your identity when it's been violently ripped away from you, trauma responses, a full exploration of the spectrum of gender and sexuality, responsibility through storytelling, the importance of community, and so on. It's honestly more than I could ever hope to explain in a review, so I hope that you give it a chance. Book number 4 is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, which was deep and dark and haunting and a really great gothic fairy tale. We follow this bridegroom, he's never named, who's a scholar of myths and legends, and he falls very fast and very hard for the mysterious heiress Indigo. They're both obsessed with legends, but in order for their relationship to continue, Indigo asks him one thing: he must never look into her past. But then there's an incident that forces Indigo to return to her childhood home, and suddenly the temptations are so strong. The bridegroom can't help but pry a little into Indigo's childhood, and especially the disappearance of her childhood best friend, and suddenly the lines between past and present and real and legend, they're all blurring together. It's a story of toxic, obsessive relationships and of violent longing and a need for love, and predators and manipulators and all the people they leave in their wake. But it's also playing very hard with fairy tales. The writing is so lush and so embellished and so ridiculous. It loves to trick you and to create false meaning using beautiful words. It invites you in and mesmerizes you and tells you to savor it, and then it tricks you and it mocks you and it leaves you with a little sneer grin. This book is definitely designed for a certain soul, so if you're hearing all this and rolling your eyes or thinking that you don't really want over-the-top melodramatic words, maybe this book isn't for you, and that's fine. The characters themselves aren't super developed. They're more like wisps kind of being plotted along to serve the plot. They're being spun into folklore and used for our entertainment. For me, this book landed, and it entertained me to the fullest extent. And to shake things up just a little, book number 5 is a non-fiction book, and it's called How the Word is Passed. Clint Smith, the author, is such a thoughtful and observant researcher and writer. This book traces just some of the memories and present-day ripple effects of slavery in the United States. And this is a very challenging project, especially since history is so messy and it's manipulated by the teller. The writing is relatively informal, but very well researched. It feels very approachable, especially if you don't read a lot of nonfiction. Sometimes Smith just states the facts, and sometimes he weaves them into more of a story, which makes this book sometimes feel a bit like a memoir. I found it to be a really compelling blend of more of these personal accounts, but also very direct and academic writing. The book is split into segments, and each segment is focused on a specific landmark or place. I thought this was a really great way to break up the material, and it really kept my attention throughout the entire book. It also gives you clear moments to take a break and digest, which I do think you really need to do when reading any piece of nonfiction. And the descriptions of each place were excellent. I felt like I had a very clear understanding of each of those locations, even though I had not been to most of them. The writing is lovely, but still very accessible, and I really appreciated Smith's approach and how he interrogated all these different personal accounts, including his own biases. He's insightful and he's attentive, and he brings stories to the forefront or directs the reader's eyes to things that are hidden in plain sight. It's both fascinating and challenging to read about the different ways institutions use and frame history. I feel as though I was able to soak in the learnings here better than other pieces of nonfiction, and I was left with so much to ponder. Let me read you a quick quote from this one. At some point, it is no longer a question of whether we can learn this history, but whether we have the collective will to reckon with it. Anyway, those were my top 5 books of 2023. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'd love it if you'd stick around and subscribe. And if you want to hear about my favorite number 6 through number 10 books of the year, you can head on over to my bindery page, which is linked below.